All right, you might be asking yourself, one consideration is how am I going to fuel for the individual disciplines of the triathlon, and how potentially am I going to fuel beforehand? First thing here is obviously the swim. That's where we all start. And the swim, not possible to take in calories while you're swimming. There's absolutely no way to get fluid on board. There's no way to get a gel in. It's not going to happen. So very important thing to ensure is that you are fueled up and ready to go before the swim starts. So let's work backwards from the start. Typically, I like to have a pre-race meal about 3 hours before the start. I think it's important to keep that it's going to be very individual and very unique to whatever you typically use in training. And as we've touched on, use those pre-training sessions, those big Ironman specific days or big race specific days to practice this fueling strategy. 3 hours before, you want something pretty plain, low fiber, high carbohydrate, set you up ready to go. And then what I like to do about 15 to 20 minutes before the start is have about 25 grams of carbohydrate in whatever form you would like. If you're doing a super long course race, you might want to aim for 25 to 50 grams of carbohydrates and maybe go for something a little bit more complex. If you need that to be 45 minutes before the start just to settle your stomach, that's totally fine. If you're doing an Olympic distance triathlon or a half Ironman triathlon, I like to just preload the system with 25 grams of carbohydrate, typically just take a gel right before the swim, and that will the carbohydrate load that you've done potentially the day before, the morning of, and then with that last minute simple carbohydrate right before the swim, that should get you through the majority of the swim. Now, if you're doing an Ironman, inherently you're going to be losing something and not replacing something. So when you come out the water, you're going to be down on carbohydrates potentially, or at least net even, and then you're going to likely be down on fluid and down on sodium. So one trick that I like to do is right when I get on the bike, my objective is to take in 2 bottles of sports drink in the first hour, no matter what. And potentially that if you're in a super humid and hot environment, you want to train this because taking on 2 bottles of sports drink straight away, that might upset your stomach. But if you know that you're going to do, an hour, hour and a half, 2-hour swim, you're going to be sweating, you're going to have sweat loss, you're going to get on the bike, you're already going to be depleted. That's not a great way to set up an Ironman. So you've got to quickly sort of get yourself back from that situation. And one of the only ways to do that is to quickly get back in that fluid, that carbohydrate, and that salt. So practice that strategy if you're someone who's going to be in the water a long time. If you're doing an Ironman swim, most people don't swim much faster than 50 minutes to an hour. Still a long time to be without fuel or carbohydrates. So you get on the bike and then immediately start pumping the fluids. And when you get on the bike, we've touched on it before, I think you have to control the intensity in the early portions of the bike if you can, and that's a great place to take on the most amount of calories. And that's why if you come out the swim and you're depleted and you can take on 2 bottles straight away, make sure the intensity is controlled so your stomach can handle that. It should, in theory, be the lowest heart rate, lowest power portion of the day, and use the first hour of the bike to set yourself up. You're not going to gain any time in that first hour. You have a lot to lose though later in the day if you don't take the time in that first hour to ensure you're getting the carbohydrates in from the sports drink, you're getting the salt back in, you're getting the fluid back in, you're taking in whatever potentially complex carbs you might need in order to set up the remainder of your day. And then when it comes to the bike is the easiest and most efficient way to take on fluid and bottles. Not only because there are likely places on your bike to hold them, but because most of these races have aid stations where you're getting handed bottles and drinks throughout the day. So you got to think of it like a rolling buffet, and you've got to try and take on as much as you need and essentially as much as you can in the first early portions of that bike in order to set up the remainder of the day. Because as the day goes on, it's going to become increasingly more difficult for you to take on board exactly what you need for multiple reasons. Number one, towards the end of the bike, the intensity of the ride is going to start catching up to you, and the last thing you're going to want to do is have to backtrack and continue to make up calories. So if you've set yourself up early in the bike with the carbohydrates, fluid, and salt that you need, you're going to be okay later in the bike to potentially decrease that just a bit and be able to just sort of push through that tough section of the late Ironman bike legs and get yourself off on the run. Now on the run, the consideration is the fact that it's very difficult to carry fluid with you. So one rule of thumb that I like to use is you have to pee on the bike. If you're not peeing, you're not hydrated enough. So a great rule is when you come out the swim, begin drinking and continue drinking until you pee. Once you pee, you know that you're in an adequate and solid position. If you haven't peed, you got to keep going. You got to keep drinking. You got to keep drinking. You got to keep drinking, and ensure that what you're taking in, You've done your research and you know that it's the right amount of sodium to the fluid that you're taking in. Because if you're taking in all these bottles, but it's not concentrated to the salt, the sodium that you need, you're going to run into a problem later down the road. So it might be something like you need to have 1 bottle of on-course nutrition and you need to supplement with 500 milligrams of sodium, something like that. So just make sure that you're paying attention to those things. Drink until you pee on the bike. And then on the run, similar theme. You want to continue to build throughout the day, have that linear progression. Early portions of the run should feel very, very controlled. First 5, 6, 7 miles, all you're doing there is you're not going to gain any time. You're just going to set yourself up to not lose time later. In these long course events, sometimes that's what this is about. It's not about going fast. It's about limiting loss later. If you've done the training, you just want to not deteriorate. And the people who don't deteriorate in long course racing are the ones who are successful. And the way they don't deteriorate is because, of course, they're very fit and they're very efficient and they're very strong, but they nailed their fueling strategy, particularly in the early portions of the bike and the early portions of the run.